It's put up or shut up time for NASA, as President Trump has drawn a line in the lunar sand and set a date for the next human footprint on the moon, as well as the colonization of Mars. And if you believe billionaire Jeff Bezos, low Earth orbit habitation is in our future. Prove me wrong. Howdy-ho, everybody. Welcome to the Prove Me Wrong podcast. We are going to be talking about space today. We are reaching for the stars on the podcast, the moon, the stars, and Mars specifically, but not necessarily in that order. Pete, here alone today. I look over at the desk, looking for Christina. I see nothing. Cannot get her excited about the moon. Can't get her excited about space. So I'm forced to hold it down solo. You are forced to listen to my sultry, smooth jazz tones while we talk about a couple of things that I found very interesting in the news regarding a renewed interest in space exploration, colonization, mining, basically claiming our manifest destiny on the universe. And we have looked into the eyes of the Lord, and he has said to us, all I have is yours, and all you see is mine. So we're looking out into the stars today. Long ago and far, far away, a human foot touched down on the lunar surface. 50 years ago at this point, so a long time ago. And that was an American foot, and it signaled the end of what was considered at that point to be the space race. It was a crowning achievement for America. It was a crowning achievement for the world. It was probably, and probably still is, the greatest accomplishment that humankind has ever enjoyed. And over the next 3 years, the Americans sent 7 manned space trips to the moon. And 12 men got to frolic around on the surface. They rode dune buggies and played golf. It was the lunar equivalent of Kellerman's summertime resort, minus Johnny and Baby. But it certainly looked like they were having the time of their lives, to keep that ridiculous analogy going. But it was short-lived, and by 1972, we shuttered the doors on the Apollo program and never touched foot again on the moon. And no other government in the world has ever sent a manned spacecraft to the moon since. It's been 47 years. And in some ways I can understand this. Priorities change, budgets change, and we had won the space race. There was no need to go back. But now, Donald Trump, President of the United States, has been busy making America great. Now he wants to make the moon great. And so he has renewed the national interest in the space exploration and ultimately colonization. He has declared that the U.S. would be stepping foot on the moon again by 2024. So that's a pretty bold and aggressive timeline. It has put NASA in a bind a bit due to the more recent de-emphasis of the space program during last presidential administrations. And in reality, we've kind of pulled back on the reins on the space program for much of the last 47 years. You know, we've had several mishaps with space shuttles, very visual, very public mishaps with space shuttles. I still personally remember sitting in school in 1986 and watching the space shuttle explode. I mean, I think if there was anything that kind of signaled a death knell or the beginning of the end for the space shuttle program, that had to be it. Having millions of students across the country watching that on television, because obviously there was a teacher among the crew, being 13 at the time, and watching that space shuttle going up into the air and then watching it explode and not really understanding at the moment what that meant and seeing that. But it's something that's been burned into your brain forever. So, and then there was another maybe 10 years ago, re-entry, coming back into the atmosphere and lost one of their heat shields and broke up coming into orbit or coming out of orbit. So those very high-profile mishaps cost American lives. I think more than anything probably de-emphasized a lot of what we were doing in terms of space exploration. And so we spent the last, 20 years up there in low Earth orbit in the International Space Station, addressing and investigating the effects of low gravity on athlete's foot versus claiming our rights as humans and exploring space, exploring what's out there beyond our gravitational pull. So again, NASA, they're scrambling now. and they have to come up with a viable plan on how they're going to accomplish this lofty goal that's been set up by the president. And in reality, he's been putting his money where his mouth is. They already had $21 billion allocated to the space agency, and they have done a new budget amendment that gave an additional $1.6 billion. So now we're at $23 billion to help us get back to the moon within the next 5 years. But again, NASA's a little hesitant. And why? Why are they so hesitant? If you are accepting of the history of the world, the Apollo 11 astronauts in 1969, they were able to escape Earth orbit on a rocket, travel through the dreaded Van Allen radiation belts. And that's really one of the sticklers of the conspiracy theorists out there, right? They're saying if those command modules would have gone through those Van Allen radiation belts and the men inside would have been turned into Salisbury steak, they would have been essentially microwaved. But some of the counterpoints to that is, well, for that to happen, they would have had to be going through those radiation belts for days, not hours. The fact that they went through hours saved them. So, okay, I will accept that for now, because I haven't been through the Van Allen radiation belts. How the hell would I know how long you have to be out there? How would I know how strong they really are? I don't. So, they escaped Earth orbit. They traveled through the Van Allen radiation belts. They floated out in the vacuum of space for 3 days with the equivalent of calculator technology, a current handheld calculator. That's what the technology was like in 1969. I have more technology in my pocket, my iPhone, than the entire United States Army had in 1969. I'm almost sure of it. I know that we're all saying that there are secret bases where they have alien tech and alien bodies, and they've been retrofitting and deconstructing these crafts for 50 years, and they know all this other stuff. I don't know that I believe that yet. I haven't seen it. If we had that kind of technology right now, I think we would have been able to have a little bit more benefit of it by this point. I would think if we had that by now, we'd be floating around out like the Jetsons in our anti-gravity cars, and wouldn't have to worry about fossil fuels and gasoline at this point. So I'm a little skeptical that we have that technology anywhere in a bunker in Arizona. I think we probably are pretty close to knowing exactly what technology we really have. So they're able to float out in the vacuum of space for 3 days. This is 240,000 miles that we're talking about. 240,000 miles in the equivalent of a Campbell's soup can. They are floating out in space. One thing goes wrong, they're dead meat. One thing. One little thing. Lose pressure somewhere in the cabin, they're dead. They were able to reach the moon. They successfully disengage the lunar lander from the command module. Command module stays in orbit. They actually go down and land on the moon in, again, a lunar lander that looks like, I kid you not, PVC pipe wrapped in aluminum foil. And that's what it looks like. I mean, how the hell did that thing travel through space? It looks like if I threw a pebble, it would destroy the whole thing. Somehow or another, they traveled that through those Van Allen radiation belts. 3 days, 240,000 miles in the vacuum of space, disconnected from the command module, and landed this thing perfectly on the moon. They get out of this lunar capsule. They dance around on the surface for the moon for about 24 hours that day. But over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, they're driving go-karts out there. They're playing golf. I mean, they're doing all kinds of reckless shit on the moon. I mean, that right there strains my credibility. They're broadcasting this. This is on television, allegedly. They're driving around on lunar landers. They're bebopping around, stumbling, falling down constantly. One tear of their suit and you're dead. You're dead on national television. People on the world are watching you die. I find that hard to believe. I find it real hard to believe. It's probably a different discussion. It's not necessarily what we want to discuss today, but it just strains believability to me that they were so cavalier with bebopping around and what they were doing with the stakes that were involved. But they did it. That's the accepted history. They were out there, last mission, Apollo 17, 1972, shuttered it from that point on. So they are able to escape that moon again, dock back with the command module, travel back those 3 days, back to the Earth, return safely, and tell their tale. So this happened at a time, again, where a black and white television was the norm. Black and white TV with rabbit ears. You got 3 channels. If you had a 13-incher in your living room, you were probably the richest kid in your neighborhood. It was a big-ass component. It weighed 1,500 pounds. It had a record player on top and an automotive body shop built in. It was the focal point of the room. It was 13 inches. Hell, I was old enough to remember my first television was a 13-inch black and white TV. I'm 45 years old. That wasn't that long ago. Now we have beautiful 4K flat screen televisions. The damn color, the picture resolution is so good, your eyes can't even really see it. You're not even really seeing it. It's just a marketing ploy. It's a promotional thing. Your eyes can't see as well as these televisions can broadcast. They're about 9 pounds. They're 85 inches across. My 10-year-old could mount it on the wall. There is nothing at this point in 2019, there is not one thing outside of a vinyl record that was better in 1969. There's no competition, by the way. Vinyl records are significantly better than any other music medium that we've made since then. If you don't believe me, play one. If you're too young to have ever heard one, get yourself a little record player. You can get them cheap. Facebook Marketplace, eBay, Amazon. They're just giving record players away. Get yourself some vinyl and listen to it. Beautiful. Perfect. That's the only thing from 1969 that I'm not giving back. Everything else, ridiculous. So, again, we're talking about a civilization with an overall technological capability of a Casio calculator watch from the 80s. Back in 1969, personal computers were non-existent. There were no cell phones. There was no Wi-Fi. There was no internet. I could go on and on and on, but you get the point. You show a kid now, you show a 17-year-old kid right now a rotary phone, they wouldn't know what the fuck to do with it. They're like, what do I do with this thing? They're trying to roll the rotary before they even pick the handheld up. That was the norm for me. I grew up with those bad boys. So it wasn't that long ago. We've made enormous strides in the last 50 years. It seems to me like it's almost as easy as just simply grabbing your phone, pushing the button, saying, Alexa, draw up some blueprints for a new space shuttle and a lunar lander. And you have this problem solved in about 17 seconds. So what's going on with NASA? What is this hesitation? What is this hesitation for being able to make it back within that time frame? John Kennedy, back in 1961, said we're going to make it to the moon within this decade. And again, I've already outlined the technological disadvantages they were working with back then. We don't have those problems now. If it's a money thing, I get it. And I do understand from the standpoint of things age, materials age out, technology ages out. But you actually have NASA astronauts on video saying that we used to have the technology to go to the moon, but now we don't anymore. I completely understand if you said, we used to have the appropriate equipment to go to the moon, but we don't anymore. But when you say we used to have the technology and we don't anymore, my bullshit button gets triggered. And, the big flashing light on my back starts going off. And I start thinking, wait a minute, how do we not have the technology to go back? Of course we do. Of course we do. Do we have the will to go back? That's the big question. So, and that I think that's where the president and the vice president are coming down, and they have actually even said, if the current contractors can't meet the objective, they'll find ones that will. They're putting money into it. And the federal government isn't the only ones that are working on this. We have a couple of billionaires who are also incredibly vested in the program and the success. So the plan is that by 2024, we would have a new American footprint on the moon. And by 2028, we have semi-permanent moon bases established. These bases are going to be primarily at this point for industry, for mining. There is a lot of material on the moon that we don't have on the Earth. That's another one of the reasons, depending on if you're a conspiracy theorist, why it's so odd that the moon is what it is and where it is sitting. It was not a part of the Earth. It did not come from the Earth. The compositions of the two bodies are not the same. Whereas the Earth is incredibly light on titanium and incredibly high on iron, the moon is the exact opposite. So there are resources there. There are things that we need, which also then asks you, why did we abandon it before? Well, back in the 70s when they were trying to drill into the moon, they found it incredibly difficult to do, and they could only get a couple inches in. The moon's outer shell was so hard. So maybe they didn't have the technology to do the things then that we have the technology to do now. Maybe that's one of the factors that make us think we're going to go ahead and make it back now, and we're going to pick up where we left off before. So a couple of the ideas that are floating around. The first idea would just be the direct approach, coming up out of the Earth, traveling to the moon, landing on one of the pre-designated sites, because you're going to have to think of where are we landing, right? You're not just going up there and hanging out. There is some scouting involved. You do have to think about, okay, where are we going to land? What's the best place? What's the best spot to set up shop? So the first idea is to go straight there and land there, set up base, and then leave from there. Second idea, which has met some resistance just because of the additional cost, would be, they call it a lunar gateway. And it would be essentially an international space station for the moon. It would just orbit the moon. It would be where these supply ships would dock. From there, they would, transfer cargo, what have you. I'm not necessarily sure what their function is. I think that's part of the problem. And from there, they would go down to the moon and transport materials and individuals down to the moon from there. It would kind of be the gatekeeper. So there are a couple of options there. The lunar gateway would cost $1 bazillion. And in the time that you were waiting to create it and build it, because you have to take things up there. Nothing just gets built by itself. We have to have rocket ship after rocket ship after rocket ship blowing up there with pieces, with hardware, with material that we're putting together. That's decades. I'm serious. That's decades of time that it's going to take you to build that lunar gateway. Much easier, much simpler just to go to the moon. Just go, land, set up shop, take off and leave. We did it in 1969. We can do it now. So their issue is a lot of hardware related. Human-rated space hardware, it's extremely complex. Obviously, I talk back to the fact that I'm still mortified anytime I see some space footage from 1969 with these guys essentially dancing around in burlap sacks and not killing themselves. I mean, that to me is nerve-wracking, watching them dance around knowing that if they skin a knee, they're going to die on national television. They're going to die. They're in zero gravity. They're in space. So extremely complex, subject to significant oversight for safety and reliability, and that makes total sense. So at this point, the last time that they've actually tested flew human space hardware was during the Apollo. I mean, it's been a long time since they've really had the need to design, test, create that type of material. So obviously, again, they have far more knowledge. They have experience placing humans in space. They did it, and they can do it again. The other issue is rocketry, shuttle technology. But again, they have some help there. Elon Musk has a private space organization that is helping to create the Falcon Heavy rockets. These rockets are actually significantly more fuel efficient and better, obviously, than what we had in 1969. They're also actually able to be guided back into place, so they're reusable. And that's a huge benefit in terms of resources, not having to ditch your rockets into the ocean and essentially they're lost. That technology is gone. So you're able to shoot those up into space and bring them back and land them safely and reuse them again. That's incredibly important. Also, Jeff Bezos, I think he is the most wealthy man in the world, I think at this point. He has a space exploration company as well called Blue Horizon. And he has also developed a lunar lander that he has recently unveiled on the world. And he has even offered this to NASA to use for some grant money, of course. We're all in this for the cash. But that puts them a little bit closer to the ultimate goal. They've already got some rocketry that they can use. They've already got a lunar lander design that they could potentially use. Now it's just a matter of putting all that together and getting out there and getting going. So I'll be incredibly interested to see how that turns out if we suddenly can rediscover the technology that allegedly we lost, and make it to the moon finally, again. That's only the beginning of the goals for NASA. The second part of that, or the second phase of that, would be going kind of the opposite direction and going to Mars also by the early 2030s. So a lot of lofty goals right now. We're talking about going to the moon by 2025, 2028. We're talking about going to Mars by the early 2030s. And they are so serious about this that they've also even had a competition with a lot of private companies to design and implement a 3D habitat printer. So this incredible machine would be transported to Mars. You could drop it there. It was designed to be able to work without water and only by using materials that are already found at the surface. You take this machine, you drop it off on Mars, it collects the materials that are there, and within 30 hours, you have a livable habitat for your scientists that are on the way. You send this 3D printer out 6 months before the humans take off. By the time they get there, they have an entire city built. That's incredible. I don't necessarily know what the goals are at this point for Mars. I think, colonization shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. At some point we have to start thinking about what are we going to do beyond the Earth. Although I know that Elon Musk kind of has a separate or a different point of view in terms of the world population. I think a lot of people are thinking that the population is going to continue to expand and expand and expand past our current resource levels, and then we're going to have a mass extinction at that point because we can no longer support ourselves. His contention is that actually, as the aging society starts dying off without being replenished by this younger society, because people nowadays they're waiting longer, right? They're waiting much longer to have children. They're not having as many children as they used to have. They're not even necessarily replacing themselves like they used to. So he is of the opinion that within the next 100 years or so, we're going to actually see a reduction in the Earth population based on the fact that the aging population will be dying off and the younger will not be producing enough to replace them. So we'll see. There's also the talk of climate change and how will that affect human life. I personally think that climate change is a byproduct of solar activity versus human interaction. I think that the humans have done some things which may contribute, but definitely not cause all of it. I say that because, some of Mars's ice caps are melting. Some of the ice on some of the planets, some of the moons on the outer planets is also showing activity in terms of melting. We have been in a long period now with very low sunspot activity, and I think all of that is kind of connected. I think that the easiest thing to think about is why your climate is changing is you just take a look at the big bright thing up in the sky, and there's your answer. When there's reduced sunspot activity, the world gets hotter. When there's increased sunspot activity, the world gets colder. It just is what it is. And when it gets hotter, the waters will evaporate, and the evaporation of the ocean will rise the CO2 level. It's all just basic stuff. So there really hasn't ever been a correlation between rising CO2 and heat. It's more a correlation between rising heat and CO2. So it's a little bit different. Both things are rising. Yes, the CO2 is not causing the increase in heat. The increase in heat is causing the CO2. I got off on a rant there. Sorry. Well, sorry, not sorry, because this is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and these are my views. A lot of what we've been seeing in terms of doomsday climate projections are just that. They're projections. They are not based in actual observable fact. And in reality, we've been in a mini ice age for the last couple hundred years, and we're just now coming out of that. And so while I absolutely agree and believe that we need to do everything we can to keep our planet as livable as possible for as long as possible, we also need to make sure that we appropriately can correlate cause and effect. What effect the things that we do have on the environment. Because if we are just fishing in the dark and don't really understand what it is that's happening and what our role is in it, we're not going to solve the problem. Now I got myself all fired up. I should probably save some of that audio gold for the Climate Change Conspiracy Theory podcast. Be on the lookout. I'm sure that's upcoming in future months. But bottom line is there are some factors that could determine what we're going to be doing on different planets. And whether or not we're going to be moving to Mars or whether or not we're going to be moving just into a low Earth orbit into some man-made habitat remains to be seen. Because that is what Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, that's what his dreams are. His dreams are a space colony, right? A space colony in low Earth orbit, which would be able to house up to 1 trillion humans, which is significantly more than we currently have on the planet and more than we may ever have on the planet. But he's talking about a low Earth orbit habitat. Essentially, if you ever saw the movie Interstellar, there are those cylindrical habitats that are rotating, which helps provide some gravity. Basically utopia, right? There would be no environmental impact. Every day would be San Diego, 74 degrees and sunny. No hurricanes, no tornadoes, no wildfires, no earthquakes, no rain if you don't necessarily need it. Perfect. You look up in the sky and you see the other half of the world, essentially. That might be a little bit of a mind freak, but still, it's a pretty bold, impressive idea. And like everything, science fiction almost always predicts where we're going to go in reality. I mean, how many times have you seen a movie from the 60s and the things that they're doing in the 60s we're doing now, right? It was unheard of back then. It was some ridiculous thing, and it ends up being manifested today. So we've seen this already in several movies, and that's what humans do. Humans dream, right? We dream of things and then we manifest those dreams. So this is something that I absolutely believe will eventually exist. His goal for this, the big picture, is the Earth would eventually be zoned residential, light industry. We would not be doing any of the heavy industry that causes all of those said greenhouse gases or would potentially harm the planet. All of that heavy industry would be happening on the moon at that point. Right, we've made it by 2024. We've made it by 2028. We are now mining the moon. It's happening on Mars. Right, we've moved our habitats out there. We've moved people there, and they are mining it. The people who are living in this low Earth orbit habitat that Jeff Bezos dreams of, they are the workers. They are the people who are traveling back and forth in shifts to the moon or traveling back and forth in shifts to Mars, and they're doing the work. They are the heavy industry. So these spheres, he's picturing 4, with 3 of them being city-like spheres, imitating current modern cities. And then the 4th could be used as a recreational sphere, where, heck, you could even adjust the gravity and you could be flying. You could fly with no wings, right? I mean, how incredible is that? So that's his goal for the future. So last but not least here, we're also talking about, as we're talking about the stars, we've hit the moon, we've hit Mars, we've hit the low Earth orbit here, orbiting habitat. There's also what they consider to be a golden asteroid floating out there somewhere around Mars, between Mars and Jupiter, that could make everyone on Earth a billionaire. Everybody on the Earth would essentially be a billionaire, which is, to me, the exact same as having no money at all. If everybody's the same, money has no value. What is the value of $1 billion when everybody has it? Is it still worth $1 billion? Or is it worth nothing? That's a philosophical question. We don't necessarily have to answer that now. But it is something that this particular asteroid is so rich in gold, iron, nickel. Apparently, the quantities are mind-blowing. So it was too good, or it's too tempting to pass up. So another one of NASA's many goals for the next 50 to 100 years, is to find a way for us to be on that asteroid, mining that asteroid, and bringing that material back and utilizing that here. And why the hell not? If it's close enough to us to reach it, let's get it. Until somebody else can put a flag on it and say it's theirs, other than the human race, it's ours. That's the way I look at it. If we're the only life in the universe, that's ours. Let's do it. But we're still a little ways off from that now, right? So the estimate is it would probably take around 25 years just to get a kind of a proof of concept. It is a long way away. It's between Mars and Jupiter, and that's not necessarily, it's in the neighborhood in terms of our solar system, but it's not next door, right? It's like, when you're a certain age and you can go next door, but you can't go to the Quickie Mart 2 blocks over. You got to wait. You got to work up to that. So we're working up to get into the Quickie Mart there. So we're talking about maybe 50 years to start commercial production. So not necessarily in my lifetime, but maybe in my children's lifetime, we are actually on this asteroid. We're mining the gold. We're living on Mars. We're living on the moon. We're living maybe in a low Earth orbit. I doubt we could have that built within 50 years. And so in terms of mining, this is only really one of a lot of possibilities. There are also several near-Earth asteroids. They pass close to the Earth, could be essentially pushed into an orbit from which we could extract the water, extract other elements that are within them, use them for what we need, push them back off into their orbit, and be done with them. And there is a global market for this already. There are a lot of investments already going into this. They're talking about this being worth somewhere around the $2.7 trillion worth in terms of value by 2040. The only thing I don't like about it, the only thing I don't like about the whole story is who is going to get there, and why do we have to get a race there? Why does there have to be a race? Why does it have to be China or the United States or Russia making it to this asteroid first and mining the gold and keeping it? Why is this not a human endeavor? This is one of those things that you no longer have governments once you leave the atmosphere. I don't think that space can be governed that way. I think that once we get out of there, it's kind of like we're all a family, right? So when you're inside the house, brothers and sisters fight like cats and dogs. When you're outside the house, we are a team. We are a group at that point. If somebody comes and messes with the group, they have to deal with all of us. I think that's the way we should look at this prospect as well. I don't think we should look at this as China is planning on dominating the asteroid mining market. That seems short-sighted to me. That seems just way too greedy. I think we need to look at this as a human endeavor, that this can enrich and inspire the entire human race. And it's something we should attack from that point of view. We should be working together on this. This is something that should really have a true collaboration across all governments. We should not be hoarding technology. We should not be efforting to win anything when it comes to the survival and sustainability of the human race, which I think that all of these plans do. All of these plans sustain the human race. It's not about America or China at that point. It's about everybody, all of us. So my hope is that we can get past that one point. That's the one sticking point where I hear that and it kind of makes me bristle a bit. I think it's just too important for all of us, and we need to work together versus working apart. So this episode of Prove Me Wrong Podcast is brought to you by Zendozone's citronella burners from JT Eaton. Listen, I live in Florida. The bugs here are big enough to steal the rent check, and a citronella candle is essential to my back patio. How do I bring Zen to my outdoor zones? Zendozones. They're shaped like fearless little tiki gods, and let Surfin' Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with Zendozone citronella burners. Zendozones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones, perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. Enjoy the outdoors again. So get Zendozones, so they're available now on Amazon and at Ace Hardware. Collect them all today. Hopefully you've liked this broadcast. If you have, you can like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. It's the Prove Me Wrong Podcast on Facebook. You can also email us on provemewrongcast@gmail.com. We are on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Spotify. You can capture us and find us on any of those platforms. And if you have any comments of your own, please feel free to drop us a line either on Facebook or an email, and we will make sure to contact you back or even read your questions on the air or have a follow-up podcast to address them. So with that in mind, hope you've enjoyed it. We'll talk to you again soon.